There is something that should feel almost impossible about the U.S. housing market right now. Home sales have fallen to their lowest level since 1995. Fewer homes are changing hands than at any point in nearly 30 years. And yet, home prices are still sitting near all-time highs. Fewer buyers, fewer transactions, but higher prices. In a normal market, those things should cancel each other out. That is basic supply and demand. But this is no longer a normal market. It is frozen. Prices are absurd. The median first-time home buyer is now 40 years old. And if you have tried to buy a home recently, you already know something is deeply wrong. You can feel it. You just may not have had the full picture of why. So let's walk through exactly how this happened. Right now, the median existing home price in the U.S. is about $418,000. Back in 2019, it was around $272,000. That is a 46% jump nationwide, not just in a few elite cities. At the same time, mortgage rates are hovering around 6.5%. That may not sound catastrophic until you remember that in early 2021, a 30-year fixed mortgage could be had for around 2.65%. That difference changes everything. Take the same $400,000 house with 20% down and a $320,000 mortgage. At 2.65%, the monthly principal and interest payment is about $1,293. At 6.5%, that same loan costs about $2,023 a month. That is roughly $730 more every single month for the exact same house, in the exact same neighborhood, with the exact same yard and the exact same walls. And the house itself now costs far more than it did just a few years ago. So buyers are getting hit from both sides. The house is more expensive, and the money used to buy it is more expensive too. This did not happen by accident. It was the result of a very specific sequence of events. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, the Federal Reserve cut rates to near zero and flooded the financial system with liquidity. By January 2021,
back in 2019, it was 272,000. Now it's 350,000. That's a significant increase. This shows how real estate values have appreciated over time.
1971. Suddenly, millions of people realized they could afford much more house for the same monthly payment, so they rushed in. But cheap money was only part of the story. The pandemic also changed what people needed from a home. A home was no longer just a place to sleep. It became an office, a classroom, a gym, and a social lifeline. Small apartments in expensive cities suddenly felt unbearable. Remote work exploded, and millions of people started asking a simple question. If I can work from anywhere, why am I paying so much to live somewhere I do not even like? So people left major cities and moved to places like Austin, Phoenix, Boise, Nashville, and Tampa. These markets already had limited inventory. Then they were hit with a wave of buyers carrying low-rate pre-approvals, extra savings, and an urgent need for more space. The result was explosive. National home prices jumped 37% between March 2020 and March 2022. In some cities, the increase was far higher. Austin rose 61%. Phoenix climbed 59%. Boise jumped 53%. Homes were routinely selling far above asking price. If you bought in 2020 or 2021, you likely made one of the best financial moves of your life, whether you meant to or not. But for everyone who missed that window, what came next made things much worse. By mid-2022, inflation had surged to 9.1%, the highest level in 40 years. The Fed responded with one of the fastest rate hiking cycles in decades. Mortgage rates followed. What was around 3.2% in early 2022 rose above 7%, and by late 2023 had reached roughly 7.79%, the highest since 2000. That meant the same mortgage that had once cost about $1,293 a month could now cost well over $2,300. The increase over the life of the loan was enormous. To afford the median-priced home at today's rate levels, a household now needs to earn roughly $106,000 a year. The median household income in America is about $83,700. In other words, the average household is more than $20,000 short of qualifying for the average home. As rates rose, demand collapsed. Existing home sales fell sharply, but prices did not crash. Why? Because supply collapsed at the same time. And that brings us to the force quietly holding this market hostage: the mortgage rate lock-in effect. Roughly half of all outstanding mortgages in the United States carry rates below 4%. A huge share are below 3%. If someone bought or refinanced in 2020 or 2021, they locked in a financial asset that effectively no longer exists. If they sell that house today and buy another one, they are not just moving. They are giving up the cheapest debt they may ever have in their lifetime and replacing it with debt that costs more than twice as much. That creates a massive penalty for moving. On a typical mortgage, that can mean hundreds of dollars more per month, adding up to tens of thousands of dollars over time. So, homeowners stay put. Not necessarily because they love their house, but because leaving it would be financially irrational. That is why so many homes never hit the market. Inventory remains tight. Potential sellers are frozen in place. The market is not collapsing. It is simply stuck. And the group being squeezed the hardest is first-time buyers. Imagine someone like Maya. She is 31, works in healthcare administration, earns $74,000 a year, has a strong credit score, no credit card debt, and managed to save $31,000 through years of discipline. By any normal standard, she is exactly the kind of person the idea of homeownership was built for. But in today's market, that is still not enough. Suppose the median home in her area costs $385,000. With 10% down, she would borrow about $346,500. At 6.5%, her principal and interest payment would be around $2,190 a month. Add taxes, insurance, and maintenance, and the total monthly cost rises to roughly $3,010. Her monthly take-home pay is about $4,650. That means housing alone would eat up about 65% of her income. She would have just over $1,600 left for everything else in life: food, transportation, utilities, insurance, student loans, emergencies, living. She cannot afford that house. Not because she is irresponsible, not because she failed, but because the math no longer works. The income needed to buy the median home comfortably may be around $110,000, and she earns $74,000. The gap is structural, not personal. And there are millions of people exactly like her. That is why first-time buyers now make up only about 21% of all home purchases, a record low. Historically, that number was closer to 40%. The median age of a first-time buyer is now 40. In the early 1990s, it was 28. That shift is not just an interesting statistic. It is the fingerprint of a generation, being pushed further and further away from one of the most basic markers of middle-class stability. At the same time, older buyers, especially baby boomers, have a huge advantage. Many are buying with cash, funded by homes they bought decades ago at far lower prices. Younger buyers are trying to compete with a mortgage pre-approval and modest savings. Older buyers are showing up with accumulated equity and no need to borrow. But the shortage itself did not begin during the pandemic. It was built over more than a decade. After the 2008 financial crisis, home building slowed dramatically and stayed weak for years. The U.S. ended up underbuilding by millions of units. Estimates now suggest the country is short somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5 million homes. And the homes that were built often targeted the upper end of the market because that is where the profit margins were. Entry-level homes, the traditional first rung of the housing ladder, largely disappeared. Then came the pandemic surge. Then the rate spike. Then higher construction costs. Materials became more expensive. Builders faced more pressure. And even when they offered incentives or rate buydowns, they still could not solve the deeper shortage. That is why this is not 2008 all over again. The 2008 crash was driven by weak lending, toxic mortgages, and a financial system built on debt that should never have been issued in the first place. Today, lending standards are much stronger. Borrowers generally have better credit. Homeowners have far more equity. Foreclosures are nowhere near crisis levels. So this is not a fragile market built on bad loans. It is a frozen market built on unaffordable prices, elevated rates, and severe supply constraints. A lot of people are waiting for mortgage rates to fall. And yes, lower rates would help. But there is a twist. If rates fall quickly, affordability may not immediately improve. Why? Because millions of buyers are sitting on the sidelines waiting for exactly that moment. If rates suddenly drop, demand could come roaring back before supply has time to recover. And when strong demand crashes into a market that is still millions of homes short, prices can surge again. So even the thing people are hoping will solve the problem could make it worse, at least temporarily. The most honest forecast is also the least exciting one, a slow, multi-year adjustment. Not a dramatic crash, not a quick rescue, just a long period where prices move sideways, incomes slowly rise, and the market gradually works through the imbalance. If you are in your late 20s or 30s right now, you are living through one of the most dysfunctional housing markets any generation has faced in decades. Not the most dramatic, but maybe one of the most quietly damaging because it does not feel like a crisis. It feels like a permanent new normal. And every industry connected to housing has an incentive to tell you it is always a great time to buy. But it is not always a great time to buy. Your frustration is real. You are not failing adulthood. The math is failing you. That is why the decision to buy a home has to be based on your numbers, not the market's narrative. If your total monthly housing cost is below about 28 to 30% of your gross income, and you plan to stay in the home for at least 7 years, buying may make sense. If the math does not work at that threshold, then it does not work. Stretching yourself to 45% of your income because someone says now is the right time does not make it wise. It just makes you vulnerable. Renting and investing the difference can be a completely legitimate strategy, even if almost nobody with a financial incentive will recommend it. In a high-price, high-rate environment, that strategy can absolutely compete with or even outperform buying an overpriced home. And if you are buying, new construction may be worth a serious look, especially when builders offer rate buydowns. But even then, every number matters. Incentives can hide inflated pricing, so nothing should be accepted at face value. The housing market we are dealing with today is the product of the cheapest money in modern American history, followed by the fastest rate hike cycle in 40 years, all layered on top of more than a decade of underbuilding that left the country millions of homes short. The people who need prices to fall are priced out even when prices stay flat. The people who could sell are trapped by the low mortgage rates they already have. Everyone is stuck on opposite sides of the same broken system for opposite reasons. And there is no single policy, no one rate cut, and no quick fix that can solve an imbalance this large in a single year. So if you look at this market and feel like none of it adds up, you are not imagining things. It really does not add up. And understanding exactly why it does not add up is the first step toward making a decision that actually works for you, instead of blindly participating in a system that keeps insisting buying is always the right move.